Okay, last 5 slides. We are talking mutation. Mutation is a new variation on which natural selection acts. A mutation is a change in DNA. It can be caused by a variety of different things, but essentially a mutation can provide new material for natural selection to act on. It can alter a gene so that it is expressed in a different way. So the majority of mutations are negative or neutral, meaning that they will either be weeded out through natural selection, they're harmful or deleterious, or they're neutral, meaning they have no effect on an organism's reproductive success or survivability. So the grand majority of mutations have no effect. So rarely, very, very rarely, you have a positive mutation. And that mutation can then increase in frequency. So let's look at mutations. Some mutations can cause immediate drastic effects. My mom has 2 mutations that make her highly susceptible to blood clots. She actually had a clot running from her ankle all the way up her inner thigh. So that was after a knee surgery. And she ended up getting this blood clot that went all the way from her ankle to her inner thigh. And it nearly killed her. She spent an entire 5 months in bed with a machine moving her leg for her. But she got over it. The clot became what we call organized. A blood clot never goes away, but it can become organized, meaning that it's nice and smooth in the blood vessel, and it's flexible in there. So it's very, very little danger of the clot breaking loose. Those genes that gave her that are the MTHFR1 and the MTHFR2 genes, or as my mom calls them, the mother fur genes. These are point mutations on enzymes. A point mutation is a change in a single pair of DNA. Remember how we talked about how DNA comes in there's the base pairing rules, A to T. Well, a point mutation is a change in a single base pair. So maybe we go from A to T to T to A, or G to C. A single change. Very, very small. That rarely causes any big effects. However, sometimes you can have these drastic immediate effects. So mutations can make a big splash. We've identified some positive mutations. Single mutations. A single mutation event can lead to a selective advantage. Let's look at an example in humans. Tibetans live in the Alps in Eurasia, Asia and Eurasia, at altitudes above 14,000 feet. And they're descendants of the Han Chinese. And a study of the genomes of Tibetans and Han Chinese revealed some kind of neat stuff. 10% of the Han Chinese had a mutation near the EPAS1 gene. And 90% of Tibetans had that mutation. Meaning there had to be a pretty big natural pressure for Tibetans to show this mutation. Well, basically, it implies those without the mutation in the ancestral Tibetan populations died off. The EPAS1 gene is called the super athlete gene. Why is it called that? Because it's involved in how the body deals with low oxygen conditions, like those you find when you're exercising heavily or when you go to high altitude. At elevations above 13,000 feet, you have 40% less oxygen than at sea level. People from lower elevations living above 13,000 feet tire out very quickly because they don't get enough oxygen. They have headaches due to low oxygen conditions. The infants have low birth weights, and they tend to have higher infant mortality. Tibetans have none of these things. And people think that the EPAS1 gene is what confers the immunity in Tibetans to those effects of living above 13,000 feet. So that's an example of a mutation, a single mutation that led to a selective advantage in humans dealing with their natural environment, altitude, one of the few things that actually can affect humans. All right, let's look at another example from mice. Most positive mutations aren't drastic changes like the mother fur gene or the EPAS1 gene. In populations of deer mice living in the sandhills of Nebraska, coat color means a lot. Ancestral deer mice had dark coats, and so they lived in areas where the underbrush was darker. The sandhills, however, are lighter colored. Sand hills, sand is a very light, grainy material. So these dark mice wandering into the sand hills stood out pretty heavily. And so if you're a hawk cruising out over the sand hills and you see a dark colored mouse, bam, lunch. Contrasting coat colors are easier for predators to see. However, over the course of 9 mutations in 8,000 years, the sand hills deer mice gained a lighter coat color. Each of those 9 mutations caused some kind of color or pattern change. And so there was an advantage to each of those mutations over 8,000 years. That's hard to imagine. 8,000 years? 8,000 years ago, Rome had not yet existed. Egypt was a twinkle in the African population's eyes. The 8,000 years is a long time just to get a change in coat color. Mutations are not instant, even though there are some mutations that do confer a big bonus. So those new color patterns weren't part of the natural variation. So even though they didn't cause a big change, they still gave natural selection something new to work with, something that wasn't in the population before the mutation occurred. And so those mutations managed to cause an entirely new advantageous trait. So on the left, we have deer mice in the Nebraska sand hills, and on the right, we have normal deer mice. And you can see how these sand hills deer mice are much better camouflaged in their environment than the ancestral deer mice here with the dark coat colors. So that's mutation providing a new trait. Even though it took 9 mutations in 8,000 years, we still see a new trait. So that's pretty cool. So our take-home message for this chapter is that speciation isn't always quick. And it isn't always drastic. There's not always a strong iron barrier between species. Sometimes it's as simple as timing or behavior, like birdsong. Sometimes it's just geography. But over time, genetic barriers will occur. It took a good long time, billions of years, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of common ancestors, and many, many speciation events to produce the different species of life present on Earth now. But all animals are linked through time to one another. We're all related. All life on Earth is family. So we should treat our family well. So make some ghee, eat some salmon, and think of what you can do for your family on our planet.